Hey, it's your girl, Stacey Bullock, your host of Tools for Everyday Living. Like I say, almost every Friday, I just get caught up in that music. It just does something. It makes me want to sway and move and feel happy and exuberant. And I hope it does the same for you every time you hear it when it comes on. Yes, we are back for another fantabulous Free Your Mind Friday. And this month, as we have been talking, is Mental Health Awareness Month. I hope you have joined us. If you haven't, guess what? You can always binge watch us. Don't forget to click it, subscribe, like, and share because we always have something to say that will enlighten you and give you some tools for this life's journey. Today, we're going to continue on the conversation about mental health, and we're going to just add a separate population in, if you will. We're going to talk about young men between the ages of 15 and 24. Yes, you heard me say we again. My guest is still here with me. I'll bring him in shortly. I just want us to look at what could possibly be the reasoning behind this traumatic experience, I will call it, when we are having a mental crisis, whether we even realize it or not. It is traumatic and it has consequences on our lives. So, we are talking about today this uh, formidable, this pliable, we hope, generation that is getting things thrown at them that they probably could never imagine. I know I never imagined some of the things that are being thrown their way, the things that they see, the things that they have to encounter and endure on a daily basis every time they wake up and their skin is still brown. They have a challenge when they leave out the door. And that challenge started way back when. It's this thing I call, not I call, but it's called psychological slavery. Many books about it. One of my favorites is Breaking Psychological Slavery by Dr. Naeem Akbar. I am so elated that I found this book probably over 20 years ago now. But it gives us some insight on the characteristics of a mind that I'm going to say is in bondage, a mind that has been altered by circumstances and situations, a mind that needs healing, and a mind that needs healing at a young age. You know, you see many videos, memes of children doing things now that we didn't. I know the children weren't doing it when I was small. You know, they call them phenomenons. I believe there's another name. I'll have to come up with it later, but I'm going to move on right now. But we want to look at some of the characteristics that are plaguing the mental health of our young men, particularly our Black and brown young men. They are having mood swings, and for various reasons. They are anxious, they're becoming depressed, and we have to find a way to help them out of their circumstance, because we have to help them understand that it is not permanent. They don't have to live like this, even if their mind is being challenged with difficulties and they have maybe problems reading, which is one of the things that we're going to delve into today with our wonderful guests. They have to make sure, I shouldn't say they, we, the adults, now have to make sure that their behavioral, their cognitive and emotional patterns are formed in a positive way. And if for some reason they have been getting information that has formed negative ideas and thought patterns in their mind, we have to now come in and break it. That's why I love this book, Breaking Psychological Slavery. It is possible, people. But that's enough of me. I'm gonna bring my guest on. You all have seen him for the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure he'll be back because he seems to be, not seems to be, he is a man who has something to offer to society. I want to introduce you via video, Pastor W. Eric Crooms.
I'm Pastor W. Eric Crooms, and this is the Believer's Report. Black religious faith is facing perhaps its most challenging period.
Pastor W. Eric Crooms is a faith influencer, speaker, and transformation coach who values dedication, service, and excellence. As a ministry leader and coach for close to 4 decades, Pastor C brings a unique, transformative, and holistic perspective to the lives of his clientele, empowering his following to unleash their purpose for a purpose and bring good to the community. Using real-world examples and biblical anecdotes, Pastor C unveils how each person in the life of your organization brings a wealth of promise that can be used toward positive and purposeful change. A native of Phoenix, Arizona, and author of 6 books, Pastor C learned the value of dedication and service coming up as the third of 6 children whose parents, the Reverends Charlie and Dorothy Crooms, were themselves exemplar models for ministry. Pastor C founded and is CEO of the Charlie and Dorothy Crooms Foundation, a nonprofit organization which seeks to improve the wellness of the community.
I'm Pastor.
Welcome back.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
You're
Glad to be back.
I'm so happy that you are passionate about this topic, this subject, and you're here to help us understand more about the mental health arena. Not that I'm going to put this out here right now. I should have said it earlier. Neither of us are therapists. I do have a degree in psychology. Pastor Crooms is a mentor and faith influencer, and he speaks from that perspective. So now, let's get back to what I was getting ready to say. Something sparked you to want to get into this arena, and I know we brought it up before, but now we're going to delve a little bit further into the mentoring area that you do on a consistent basis. And there's something that sparked that. So that's what I want to know about. What made you say, wait a minute, I can do something about this?
Yeah, great question. And thank you again, Stacy, for having me back for this much needed conversation about mental wellness in our community. And as you just stated, I speak from a faith perspective. I guess what really brought it home for me was during the time that I was exposed to teaching environments via substitute teaching in several school districts here in the Fort Worth area, and seeing up close and personal some of the effects that witnessing some of our Black and brown boys who were in the classrooms and were, attempting to read or were asked to read, and just observing some of those trends and styles of reading and what was the expectations. In several instances, I witnessed, a Black boy just moving his lips and not reading, or just giving the appearance of reading. And that was a coping mechanism that I picked up on. So I decided to expand my exposure to this environment, and any kind of teaching assignment that I took, it was along the lines of reading interventionists, language arts, things of that nature, so that I could really observe it even more up close and personal. So in my time in the classroom, I would, while the other kids were working on their lesson plans, I would have some of the Black boys come over to my desk, and I would just open up a book that was on their reading level, and I would ask them to read and just kind of listen for some signals. And then I would read back to them. And of course, I would make the necessary or bring to their attention the necessary adjustments that they needed to make in their reading, in terms of, the pace, the cadence of their reading, pronunciation of the words, stopping at a period, pausing at a comma, just things like that, that most of the other kids were probably ahead of this particular demographic. So that really inspired me to become a little bit more active and to see what I could do to change that, because, obviously I'm an author myself and I love books, and I know that I know what impact books can have on the mind. And certainly with our Black and brown boy demographic, if we can get them inspired to read and to fall in love with the art of reading, I think it would make a tremendous difference in what we're seeing across the board in terms of high school dropout, the high school dropout rate, things of that nature, behavioral issues that we see in the classroom. That's not the only thing that can impact it, of course, but I think, from my perspective as a mentor, that's what I control the most.
I got that big old smile on my face, because when you said that you can control the most,
right?
It is so important for us to stay in our lane, because that's what I heard you say. That was my interpretation of what you said,
Exactly.
and it is extremely important that we know to do that. Not everybody can go into a mentoring position or be in a school district or substitute teach, for that matter. Kudos to you. Kudos, because there are few who can do that successfully. And you have to, first of all, you really have to be passionate about it, because you face some difficult challenges yourself. I'm sure it was not easy for you to watch young men who will grow up one day, or we pray that they will grow up one day. That's another thing they have to deal with. They may not reach adulthood, and if they get interested in reading, then reading will take them many, many places that they may not physically experience, but their mind will be open to it. And then once the mind is open and receptive to good things, it keeps seeking after those things.
Exactly. And that's all part of it too, because, when studies show that if a Black or brown boy is not reading on their reading level by the fourth grade, it's going to be a very dismal future. The possibility that they will drop out of high school increases. I mean, it shoots way up that they may not even make it through high school. And not to mention just the confidence that reading, as I said, pointed to the example of the kids lip reading, but they weren't really reading the books along with the class. So it's a matter of confidence. They don't have the confidence. And so if we let that trend continue, we're looking at a generation of boys, and indeed we have already seen a generation of boys caught up in the criminal justice system because they lack in just one of the basic necessities for success in American society.
Exactly, exactly. And I was just, it kind of alludes to this question that just popped up in my head. Um, do you think that, so because, okay, they're I was going to say lip syncing, lip reading in class, that gives the persona that they are on track with everything. And so, what is my question is, oh, because are they doing this, you feel like, because they don't want to be judged?
Absolutely. Yes. They don't want to be judged. They don't want to be, singled out as the kid who can't read. As you know, kids, we were kids once. We know how it is with kids begin to ridicule you about this or that. So they don't want to be judged by the teacher, don't want to be judged by their peer groups, and just don't want to be that person that is singled out. So yeah, they're doing it. As I said, it's a coping mechanism
Mm,
to deal with the reality of not being able to read proficiently and efficiently as do
right,
their peer groups.
right. So, where do you think that this conversation should start? I mean, somehow it got past them being in kindergarten, and someone continued to move them on. Where does this conversation start about um, your son or daughter, your son, at this, we're talking about male, so your son needs help. Who starts that conversation, and how do we make sure that the conversation continues?
Yeah, I think it. I personally think it begins at home, right? Because
Mhm.
there's got to be some interaction between the school and the home, obviously. Um, but I think it's a conversation that we have to have, and it's not really that disconnected from the bigger conversation that we're having this month about mental well-being. This is connected, I think, to their
Mhm.
not only their present mental wellness, but to their future mental wellness as well. Again, I'm not saying that a kid does read on their efficiency level or proficiency level is going to grow up and be the next president, the next black president of the United States. We want that to happen, obviously, but I'm not suggesting that alone is the single most important marker. It is one of the factors that has to be present. They have to be able to check off if they're going to be successful in life. They have to check that box off that they are they in love with books by the time they graduate high school? Maybe not. It takes a
Right.
special person to be in love with books by the time you graduate high school. But it is one of the markers. And I know a lot of critics point to the standardized testing system in America, the racial bias inherent and implicit in that system. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
People in our savings, our black savings, have been waging that war for generations. This goes way back, even beyond the civil rights movement. But we've been waging that war forever. But the question is, be it as it is, that system is in place, what are we going to do about it? Short of putting our own system in place, which right now
Mm-hmm.
it's not a practical idea because we don't own the education grouping. So we have to get into the education grouping as parents, concerned citizens, mentors, um, and effect change within it and demand change within it as well. But it's not something that is going to happen overnight. It's been a struggle for many generations, but I think it's well worth it. But we have to make some kind of intervention early. You mentioned third grade. It also goes all the way back to kindergarten. Okay, where they're coming out of kindergarten, moving into first, second, and third grade, and their reading skills are not up to par. So I do think it's a conversation that has to happen at home. I've written a couple of articles on my website and suggested some practical ways, practical tips that we could do that are, very simple. I remember when my son, who is now 16, when he was 6, 7 years old, he was strapped in the back in his car seat. I made sure he had a book back there. All right. That's something we can do. Very practical.
Mm-hmm.
As we travel down the roads, I would tell him to count the number of every telephone pole, every tree that you pass, count. Just make them count. Having books in the home, books in the bedroom, books in the living room, books in the car, as I mentioned. So just some things that doesn't sound like a lot, but they make a huge impact indirectly. I think that we can do as parents, mentors, caregivers to reverse this trend, because this is I'm sad to say, Stacy, that it's an issue. Black boy reading, Black boy literacy is an issue that frankly is not getting a lot of attention. If it is getting attention, it's getting negative attention, right? So I don't like to go on to platforms like this and rattle off all of the dismal statistics, but I like to talk about what we can do to change it and what we must do to change it. But right now in our community, I don't think it's something that's at the top agenda when we talk about problems inherent within the community. A lot of people have written about it, but I don't think we're really conversating about it. And again, the conversation to me is connected to the larger conversation of Black boy mental wellness, which is following the trajectory of Black men mental wellness.
Mm-hmm.
If our Black men are not, mentally well and performing at that high level of mental well-being, that obviously is going to trickle down to Black boys and even Black girls as well.
For sure. We're going to take a little break, but when we come back, you were mentioning mental wellness. Let's expand on how just this, there are many factors, as we know, many factors. And if we want to include more factors, that's fine as well. But we talked about the confidence, and when someone has low confidence, low self-esteem, how does that affect their mental wellness, and what could that possibly lead to if their mental wellness continues to go down the path of low confidence?
Absolutely.
But we'll be back.
Resilience is necessary for all of us. It gives us the ability to recover quickly from difficulties of any kind. Psychologically, resilience is our mind's potential to cope with a crisis and return to a healthy state of mind. Resilience is the core strength you use to lift the load of life. The secret to maintaining and building to adopt a growth mindset, nurture your emotional intelligence, hone in on our problem-solving skills. We must learn from problems, take them as opportunities to grow. That's what resilience looks like. It is the demonstration of growth and maturity in every area of our lives.
Yes, you are uniquely you. Nobody else here like you. You might got some similar features, but you are uniquely you. We're going to bring Pastor W. Eric Crooms back in and talk about how this low self esteem from not being able to not just read, I mean, it's probably trickling over to math, probably trickling over to just being able to sit still in your seat.
Right. Yes, that's very correct there. Well, everything is context, right? Um, things, the things that we are witnessing and observing among our Black boy demographic and Black girls as well is not happening in a vacuum. So we know that there are three realities that African Americans are facing in the 21st century. Racism, number one, racism is the leading cause of death for African Americans. And we suggested, I think, during the first broadcast that racism kills by subjugating access to positive wellness outcomes. So even in the classroom where our Black boys are not reading on a proficient level, it's due in part to the fact that positive wellness outcomes as it relates to reading are being blocked or hampered by racism. The second reality facing us in the 21st century is that African Americans have historically been underserved by the mental health establishment and the medical establishment. We refer to that as medical racism. So we're underserved, and we are over stigmatized in that grouping, and that's impacting us from black men, Black women, down to Black boys, Black girls. And then lastly, this the third reality is that we know that due to this stigma that we're seeing, we can pray and we can pray and we can seek therapy. Those two things work together, and that we can use all of God's resources to achieve emotional wellness, because that is what God wants us to, what he wants us to achieve is emotional wellness. So that's the context. And in this context, we're seeing these coping skills, or lack thereof in most cases. But even that, Stacey, is connected, in my view, to a context. We talk a lot about the breakdown of the Black family. And again, goes back to what racism has done to us in this country for 400 years, right? So what we're seeing now is these coping skills, and there are, I'd like to think there are at least four markers or four factors that are producing these coping skills that are kind of popping up on the radar, so to speak, of the Black boy and Black girl demographic. We mentioned Black men 15 to 24 as the fastest growing suicidal demographic in the Black community.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. That's not to say that Black young girls are not committing suicide or attempting to commit suicide at all. Both groups are showing up on the radar for different reasons. Okay. And some studies also take that age group in the Black community down to about the age of 5, where it actually begins. So there are four factors, according to some studies that I have read and kind of coalesced into what I'm about to present now. Number one, interaction with law enforcement is a chief factor in the Black boy, Black young men mental faculties that we are seeing. Okay. These encounters, according to these reports, often reinforce feelings of racial stigmatization and inferiority. So when a young Black boy, could be as young as 10, 12, up to 17, 18, when they have an encounter with law enforcement, this is where their feeling of hopelessness begins. And add to that, Stacey, the fact that we've witnessed these encounters through the deaths of Arbery, George Floyd, Michael Brown, Breonna Taylor. We've witnessed this. We've seen these killings and the aftermath of these killings over and over, and that plays into a corporate mindset. And when a Black boy comes into contact with a law enforcement officer, and that contact or that interaction is a negative interaction, bad things happen up here for our Black boys. The second marker is incidents of racial antagonism.
Let me interject a little bit here, because we can't forget we just had a burial of a United States Airman, Mr. Roger Fortson, who was murdered by a police officer in his own home. So yes, how the continual repetitive playing of it over and over again, not the actual murder, but the story itself gives the mind of a little battlefield to have to navigate through.
Exactly.
So what you're saying is, so on point, but I apologize. Go right ahead with the next.
Yeah, and the argument for that, though, the response to that, Stacey, I'm glad you brought it up, is that it's like a two-way argument where you have some parents who say, well, I'm going to protect my children from seeing that replay, not watch the news, read about what happened with this encounter with this police officer. But it's happening so frequently now, almost a weekly incident, that it's hard to protect or to keep your children from seeing it. So we want to protect them by not showing them or allowing them access to see this over and over again. Or do we say they need to see this? They need to know what's going on, in the words of the poet Marvin Gaye, so that they can find a suitable method for dealing with it.
Right. Now, I'm not an advocate of complete shielding.
Right.
I've unfortunately, I had to help my own children undo some of that sheltering. And so it's definitely not something that I would say, no, let's keep them from it completely. However, I believe that the repetitive playing of it from a negative perspective is what I'm talking about now, because that has the ability to now put something in your mind that becomes permanent. And now you got to go in and carve that thought out from the negative standpoint. So we got to balance it, as we talked about a few shows ago and today. I believe I just heard you say something about prayer, but we have to have prayer as parallel with whatever methodology, come on, mouth and brain work together, methodologies that we are going to, participate in that help us to, again, navigate through.
And I think one of the best things we can do, and from the faith community perspective, is the best solution to whether we shield them or expose it. One of the best equalizers is we talk about it. We actually put them in a forum, okay? And we ask them, what are your feelings? What do you think about this? And this is something that the faith community can bring. And I think I posted an article a couple of days ago about that very thing. We have to make, and I'm not saying that ministers and clergy and pastors aren't doing this, I'm just saying we need to do it more. We have to make message of Christ, Jesus Christ, central to the context in which our youth are living in 2024 in America. And not just assume that there are that because they go to Bible study, that they're okay. We can no longer afford to think that the method of Bible study is okay, it's working. The message we don't change, but the method we must change, and we must find a way to get them to open up about it and to express themselves, because they're not able, I don't think so anyway, that they're able to have those kind of discussions in their classrooms. I mean, look at what's happening with the war on DEI now, and the war on certain books that have to be destroyed because they don't want, kids reading this and that. So the conversations, I'm sure, are probably going to be up next. It's going to be the next battlefield.
Right.
Things you can't talk about the history of racial oppression in America. No, that's taboo.
But we can go back to what you originally said about where the conversation begins. And it begins at home. And if for some reason the home is not capable of providing such substance, then people like yourself and myself as mentors and those watching become mentors for this purpose. Because I remember when my son was having some challenges in school, and it definitely wasn't because he's not smart enough, because it's actually because he's too smart for them. They didn't know how to give him the work that he needed that was going to stimulate him and satisfy him in the education arena. So at that point, when I found out, now it's the responsibility of the parents to make sure that we have these conversations where our children get to express their feelings, not disrespectfully, but they do get to express their feelings. And just what you said a few minutes ago about asking them, having guidance as we see these things come across the screens, small screens, big screens, all size screens, where negativity is being portrayed and shown, demonstrated that maybe their life doesn't matter. And so now we have to allow them. And at these moments, everybody is having the experience of learning who we are and how to have effective conversations when it comes to things, when it comes to emotions. And that's, I don't think we've not had for a long time, conversations that are effective regarding emotions. And that's the reason for the mental wellness of our brown and black boys that we're talking about today. So I think you were about to give us some more points.
Oh yeah. So remember, it's 4 markers which point to negative mental health outcomes among the black adolescent population. The second one was incidence of racial antagonism, especially in their peer group or external to their peer group. That's another marker of negative mental health outcome for especially black teens, 12 to 18 years old. So what happens is if they've been called the N-word, if they've been pointed out due to their race, the color of the skin, in some instances, if they've been exposed to gay slurs, anything like that, these also point to negative mental health outcomes. So that, again, the reason that I'm mentioning these 4 markers is because these are 4 point of conversation markers that we can have with our black boys and, again, our black girls. Thirdly, negative peer pressure, which has been around since the history of time, right? Everybody, listen, we all came up through negative pressure, right? So, but in this case, though, in the 21st century, with the advancement of technology and social media, negative peer pressure is probably 1,000 times more lethal than it was when I was a teenager. And social media influence is one of the big factors that studies point to in why kids are not coping well with their environment due to some of the ridicule that they see on social media, some of the images that they try to live up to but can't. And it leads to a lot of self-loathing, self-hatred, and is the primary driver for suicidal outcomes. And then lastly, going back to what you mentioned earlier, just the personal coping skills, teaching our kids resilience, right? How to overcome, handling setbacks, positive, extracting something positive from a negative. Those markers, I think, if we can get those markers injected into a conversation, not only in a community sense, faith community sense, but as you said, parent to child as well, a good guide, parent to child. Of course, each of these could be reinforced by scripture from a faith community, but I think they're very, very effective and very helpful. Obviously, when you talk to the teenage population, you don't get a whole lot of cooperation, right? I know when I talk to my 16-year-old about, I'll just ask her, well, has anybody used the N-word on you from the dominant class there? Or just, issues with more topics with the opposite sex, things of that nature. You don't get a lot of input, but I think it's still good to have these conversations because you're putting things in their minds and you're giving them that ground in which they can begin to foment their own personal coping skill sets and ideas about how to handle setbacks and how to handle a negative situation and turn it into something positive.
Exactly. And the language, there's almost a language barrier nowadays between people our age and those in my granddaughter's age and your son's age. It's like what I have to have a dictionary of, well, what does that mean? I had to ask the question just the other day. Well, I heard this, but I didn't understand what it meant. And, so my daughter, actually, she explained it to me, but having the conversation is necessary, and sometimes we don't even know what conversation to have per se for this generation because they experience so much more than we did.
Right.
I never would have thought that I might have to have a conversation. Thankfully that he has parents. So my grandson, who's 7, who, wants to explore, know about, women's bodies. And it's like, ooh, I'm glad I don't have to have that conversation because I don't know if I would actually know how to have it. Now, once they have it with him, then I can jump in if he has other questions. Grandma and grandson, grandma and granddaughter relationships are much different than my relationship, with my daughter and her with her daughter. And I'm thankful that my mental wellness came into play when they're now at the age that they are, because now I can not have that mindset of, oh my God, what do you mean? Don't talk about those things. No, let's talk about these things, because being almost 60, the conversations that we had with our parents, for me, was almost none, and about specific issues.
Right.
But so then that played a role in my mental well-being growing up. And so, but now it's like, oh, well, wait a minute. I don't want to do the same thing to not only just my children, but my children's children, and not have effective, meaningful conversations with them. My grandson, even at 7, he's on the autistic spectrum, kind of far down, but still there. But he will call me at 7 years old, you know, saying, I just wanted to say hi, Mom. So that opens the door for me to have effective communication with him, conversations and relationship building. So what do you think about how relationship building plays a role, especially as a mentor in the school system, and not just in the school system? You have your own organization. You can tell us a little bit about your organization, but tell us, about the mentoring steps.
Yeah, and it's definitely relationship building, building trust, developing a rapport with kids these days. Going back to my example of calling those young men over to my desk, and I would tell them, you're not. This is not going to be, counted as a test or anything like that. But I just want to give you some tips on reading professionally and efficiently. So it's definitely relationship building. I started the Kusoma project. It's an online advocacy group now, but we're getting ready to have a big event in August, what we're calling a read in,
Mm-hmm.
and I call it kind of like a boots on the ground kind of operation, where we're going to be exposing these young Black boys, young Black men to books directly. And so we're looking for that, but it is relationship building. And also I want to say that in terms of some of the things that our children, not just Black boys, but Black girls as well, I am not trying to suggest, I don't want anybody to get the impression that that I am in everything on external causes. And I'm glad you mentioned your grandchild. You mentioned autism. If your child is suffering from, or I shouldn't say, does have autism or some kind of attention deficit disorder, things of that nature, whatever diagnoses there is, please get the necessary help that those kids need. We're not diminishing the fact that our kids probably need some kind of medical intervention. That's the reality. What I'm saying is if your child, Black or Black girl, is developmentally fully capable of reading, writing, mathematics, the whole 9 yards, that's the segment that we need to push to, facilitate a love of books, facilitate a love for reading, a passion for it. It just helps them so much. It just expands their imagination, expands their intellect, gives them a credible basis for seeing the world and relating to other cultures, and being able to exchange with other cultures. So by all means, your child is in one of those groupings, please, don't think that I'm saying that it's racism. I'm not. I'm saying that things that we can do to improve Black boy mental health outcomes, that we can start right in the family, building relationships in the family with that young man by surrounding him with books and by engaging school officials. We know that, these school districts aren't perfect. We know that there are bad apples in the classroom as far as teachers and things of that nature. And we know that this effort by the religious right, MAGA people, whatever you want to call them, to, burn books and stop talking about DEI and all that stuff. We know that it's a reality, but we can't let that be an excuse. We have to advocate for our children. It's the bottom line. I think it was Frederick. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Frederick.
I think it was Frederick Douglass who, one of my favorite quotes, he said, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." Right? So we have to do what we need to do to become advocates. And I consider myself an advocate. I want my Black boys and Black girls to read just as proficiently and with as much affection as the kid and the other peer group sitting next to them. I don't want to see Black boys just moving their lips and looking up and seeing who's watching them because they know that their reading skills are not on par with their peer groups. I don't want to see that. I want to do something about that. That makes me angry, and I want to do something about it.
I could tell it touched the nerve. And I'm glad, all of us ought to be that way. When something touches us, a nerve, we ought to say, well, what can I do about it? And speaking of, the school systems, I can give advice for parents, as I was talking about my son when he was 8 and 9 years old and discovering that his capacity to think was well beyond the people that he was sitting next to. And so at that point, mom had to get involved, and his dad was in a different state. So it was, hard for him to get involved. But I started going to the school and sitting in on the classes and see what was going on, what's happening. And I wound up writing a letter to the superintendent, hand delivered the letter. Actually, at the slight suggestion, I don't want to get anybody in trouble if they ever find out what school it was, but the slight suggestion of the principal, because their hands were tied with certain things that they just couldn't undo. And so they said, but you as a parent, if you go and say the same things that we've been saying, they might pay attention. And I'm going to say to you parents out there who need somebody to pay attention, they paid attention that day. My son came home and said, Mom, what did you do? I'm like, what do you mean? He said, they had us all sitting in the gym. They removed the teacher immediately.
Wow.
And because, the teaching skills were not there at all. No control of the classroom, nothing. And so that was not just for my son, though. I thought about the children more so who did not have a support system like my son has. And so that's actually was my driving force. Yes, my son being in the class made us aware, but it also gave me the opportunity to say and demonstrate, well, what can I do? And at the suggestion of the leaders at that particular school, they suggested to write a letter, and I hand delivered it to the superintendent that day. Awesome. And so it's important. I'm just saying that it's important for us as adults, from whatever perspective you're coming from, parent, outsider looking in, mentor, substitute teacher, get involved, because their minds are at stake here. And we want to make sure that they have a stable mental wellness to continue having a productive life. Pastor, you mentioned earlier about a book. And I think this is the first time you mentioned about a book that you wrote. Tell us about that book. Tell the people how they can reach you. And just like always, it's always fun. Seems to fly away from you real fast. Time is essence here. And so tell us, give us some insight on your book. If you want to mention your organization's name again, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. She wrote Brother to Brother, Becoming Healthy Men from the Inside Out. I actually wrote it published it in 2008. But it's always been my personal go-to reference because the seminal issues that we're facing in 2024 are not just going to go away. So the opening line of my book, I paraphrase the great Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois in the opening line. The problem of the 21st century for men of color in America is the problem of the giant, the willingness of Black men to move against the internal and external forces that stand between us and our freedom. And I write that there are giants roaming the spiritual, emotional, intellectual, and physical landscape of the Black male superorganism, preventing too many of our brothers from claiming their God-given brand new future. So that really expresses, I think, the whole of what I try to do as a mentor, as an advocate, and as a faith influencer. And because, Stacey, our mental health touches every part of our lives. And for too long, we've been conditioned to think that our mental health is somewhere tucked away in this little compartment over there that I can check on every now and then. No, you need to be checking in mentally every single day. And I think one of the jobs that we have to do in the faith community is stop divorcing our spiritual and mental health, but make it one. Begin to have mental health forums right in our congregations. Let our children see the adults talking about it and invite them into the conversation. And then guess what? They're going to start talking about it when they come of age, and they're going to invite younger generations to talk about it. Then maybe we can remove these stigmas, remove these old wives' tales about, you got to be strong all the time. Don't let them see you cry, brother. Things of that nature. So that caption really says a lot. The name of the book is Brother to Brother, Becoming Healthy Men from the Inside Out. Like I said, I published it in 2008, but there are still some copies in circulation. The name of my online group is the Kusoma Project, Kusoma. Kusoma is the Swahili word for love for books or love of reading. So we're just trying to instill that love in specifically the Black boy demographic, but all Black children, Black and brown children for that matter, and get them to fall in love with books. And that's on Facebook at the Kusoma Project. We're in the middle of a spring closeout, moving toward the summer read-in, which is going to be in August. So if you'd like to support us with that effort financially, making a donation, you can do so at the Kusoma Project on Facebook or on my website, PastorWEricRooms.com.
Thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank our listeners. We are so grateful for you all. We will never take you for granted. We'll be here next Friday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Don't forget to press subscribe, like, and share, because we know that here on Tools for Everyday Living, there will be something said that will be a positive for your journey. All right, we'll see you next Friday.